Welcome to Show Studio. Thank you for coming down so early in the morning. But it's a good reason to be up bright and early because we're going to be talking about the Loewe show, which is always an exciting one, given that J.W. Anderson, Jonathan Anderson, is really kind of shaking up what's going on there and doing some really interesting and exciting things. This is his second women's wear show, but we've seen 2 menswear shows from him. So there's quite a lot to kind of discuss. He also had quite an interesting and exciting show under his own name in London. And there's a couple of topics that I think he and Loewe throw up that I want to kind of talk about before we have a look at the show, which is the ingredients for successful rebranding. I think he has done quite a ferocious rebranding there, and it's been quite exciting to watch that. And that kind of leads us quite naturally into a discussion about the importance of advertising and imagery, which is something that I think has been so particularly special to him. I interviewed him recently, and he actually said, designers do not exist without image makers and stylists. Fashion is image. You can be the greatest designer, but if you don't have an image, then how do you sell it? Which I thought was quite interesting. And then we'll also talk about a modern it bag, which I think is interesting just given the puzzle bag. It's actually quite an unusual bag, and I want to delve into that a bit more. But enough from me. Before we kick things off, I'll let my wonderful set of panellists, very big panel, from all across the industry, introduce themselves, starting with you, Lainey.
I'm Lainey Sheridan-Young, and I work at Finch & Partners on brand development and business development.
I'm Nathalie Khan, and I teach fashion history and theory at Central St Martin's and London College of Fashion.
Morning, my name is Ronojoy, and I'm Group Creative Director at Days Group.
Hi, I'm Tilly Macalister-Smith, and I'm a writer and digital strategist.
Oh, I'm Andrew Davis, Creative Director of Wonderland magazine.
Hi, I'm Harriet Quick, I'm an editor and journalist.
I always feel really proud when everyone introduces themselves. I'm like, wow, what an amazing set of people we have here. It makes me feel really good. Okay, so I want to start with the first topic, which is what makes a successful rebranding. Big question, anyone can kind of kick things off. Has Loewe been a successful rebranding?
Yes.
Yes. Why?
Well, I think that he started off by changing the logo, obviously. Well, not obviously, because that's not what everyone does, and it was quite controversial at the time. People were like, weird, he's done the logo first. And then the product kind of stood up to the rebranding. I think. I mean, you can't just put a new logo on something and then decide that you're not going to do anything else.
Yeah.
And I think that the product is phenomenal that he's come out with. Obviously, Stuart was there before, and so it wasn't a nobody. I mean, I think that sometimes when we're looking at some of the press on it, you think, it was a really dusty, old, tired house, but it wasn't.
It wasn't.
He's gone on to do Coach.
Yeah.
So yes, I do think it's an incredible rebranding, and obviously we're going to go into the advertising and everything else that he's done with it, and kind of sustaining that branding throughout the digital and keeping that everything sort of moving forward.
Yeah.
And that I think we're always engaged with what he's doing.
Yeah, you kind of can't miss it.
You can't miss him, and I think he's keeping us kind of in touch with what he's doing, and he's linking it with his own brand quite cleverly. I mean, I suppose we'll probably go into that as well.
I think there's also something interesting about actually that question about rebrand, and actually a step back and what makes a good brand. And I think what he's doing is, what makes a good brand is building a world, building a philosophy, a set of values, a mission and ambition, and a world around that, and that's something he's doing completely. I think, in terms of other rebrands, he's shown, I think, an important and a healthy disregard for the status quo, but it's also kind of put his stake in the ground to reflect the times. I think that's a very important thing. Not, a lot of kind of new creative directors or designers will come into a house and you don't really see a marked shift or transition for what that brand stands for, while staying true to its kind of philosophy.
I think it's really smart that you say that, because I think it also ties in actually to what you were saying earlier, which is this notion that I think I don't know how deliberately, but almost there has become this narrative that it was kind of this fuddy, like dusty old house, and then he's kind of enlivened it, which I think is really interesting, because as you say, it actually wasn't.
Some of the work has started to happen, and then he's getting
and he's kind of jumped in there. It really has. When I interviewed him, I asked him about Eddie Slimane at Saint Laurent, and I said, do you feel like what you've done is similar? And he was like, yeah, I do in a way. I think what he did was really smart. Like, he was like, you can't do anything halfways. And I thought it was interesting that he did make that comparison, but then reaction has been very different. People were quite negative about the Saint Laurent changes, whereas they haven't been about Loewe, I don't think.
Not in terms of sales on the Saint Laurent changes, though.
No, very true.
I think it's very hard. I think when we look at the image and the proposition in the show, and things are exciting and they're aligned, but I think to say success is very early, because the success needs to be judged on sales. And I think it's good, like Saint Laurent, it takes years to measure the books and see what's really pushing through, and can he make a good go of ready-to-wear, which was never that successful under, but previously Loewe. It is an accessories house and a handbag house fundamentally. So I think, you know, it takes time. But I mean, in terms of image and trying to catch people's imagination, he's put those ingredients in place, and you know, very quickly, I think.
That notion of time is really smart as well, because you know, he's talked a lot in interviews about how he wants to redo every store, and you know, there's been a lot of press around the new Miami store that they just did, but there are, I think it's like 160 something stores, so that as you say, it's going to take a long time, and you know, even just like phasing out old products and bringing new products in to measure success.
It's interesting also that you say, Harriet, how we measure success and we look at sales. Of course, that's an important factor, but I also think that, and I think the comparison is really good with Saint Laurent as well, is this idea of cult following. And I see it, you know, at college, I see it with the students. They are obsessed with J.W. Anderson. They wear the big branded T-shirts. They carry their Loewe bags already.
But I think that's key.
And these are kids, these are 20-year-old kids. So there's a real interest and passion for this brand, but coming from a completely different level.
So what were you saying?
It's just in that they're wearing the T-shirts, it does come back to the product, and one of the reasons that the Saint Laurent rebrand was so successful is that Hedi maximised all the different categories. So in ready-to-wear, like, you've got that permanent collection of bikers and bombers and leather trousers and boots, and I think that's something where JW is changing the perception of Loewe, like Harriet says, from a leather maker to a ready-to-wear house, and that's a huge mental shift. And that will take time, but that's where the revenue will come in, and where you can start talking about the brand as like a whole feeling when you've got those campaigns.
I also think beyond the product, the idea of kind of curating the brand. I mean, we've seen that kind of with the rebrand, with kind of working with with myself, the different facets of that, the kind of the publication that he recently done, the collaborate, the kind of arts and crafts identity. That's something that, I mean, with John Allen, you know, I think that's something, he's building a world around that, and you see kind of whether it's, you know, Rick, Raf, Ray, those worlds and the different kind of media outputs of that.
Well, again, like Hedi is a photographer.
It's nice that he's allowed to do it under the LVMH umbrella, though. You know, that's I think what's quite interesting, and in a way revolutionary.
I think it is interesting, that notion of a world. I was interested this week, I don't know if he's done it before, but I just noticed it this week, that they've launched a bookshop on the JW Anderson e-commerce site, and I thought it is...
And the other thing they've done is that you can pre-order the Moda Operandi model, which I thought obviously shows the commercial.
Yeah, well, he's so commercial, and commercially minded. He talks about that quite a lot, you know, how I think he's as turned on by looking at the spreadsheet as he is kind of looking at...
That's great.
Yeah.
And that's good for the...
Yeah, I think that maybe that is why they like him.
I noticed the bookshop as well. I think that's, again, a way of creating following.
Yeah,
and of putting a community together. So this is what I'm interested in, so this is what you should know about.
Yeah.
I think that's a smart move.
And he talks about his collaborators a lot as well, which again expands his community, which most people want to make it all about them, but he talks, you know, you see his head designer being interviewed quite a lot. You see, obviously, even when he's selling the clothes, he's referring to the sculptor and the potter that he was, you know, inspired by with the buttons. I mean, most people don't do that.
I also think most young designers don't have sort of concrete teams that early. I think he's been very clever at kind of like, you know, I think he's looked at the greats, you know, people like, I don't know, Marc Jacobs, and gone, right, they have a really clear team that they've worked with for a really long time. I'm going to do that even though I'm really young. And he's kind of got his photographer, and he's got Benjamin Bruno doing...
Jamie Hawkes.
Yeah, exactly.
He's also not afraid to show his kind of reference for, and I think for a lot of that kind of Loewe audience, not necessarily know beyond product, seeing what that brand stands for, and suddenly there's a lot more kind of imagery and the sort of touch points that he's kind of curating and creating around that. I think is
customers were never fed that before. You were never given anything beyond who the designer was. I mean, we might know because we work in the industry, we know something, but not all these facets.
I think I think the Loewe touch points before, which Stuart played with, were very much about the Spanish history. So you had, you know, the art scarves, or you had maybe a reference to horses or flamenco that were very beautifully done, but actually it was very classical, and now you see JW taking a far more tangential sort of style culture approach to the brand, which is very exciting in many ways, because actually it's not unlike Celine in that it's kind of like a clean slate, really, what you can play with there.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think it's interesting how we talked about, I think this notion of touch points is interesting, because I think he's done it very well in a kind of branding sense, like visually, like there's always a new image for you to regram, there's always kind of some like picture you can post on your Tumblr or whatever, but then also kind of goes back to what you were saying, Tilly. I think he's been so good at like, you know, stuff, and there's such a market for stuff, like little key rings, little pouches, little round thing, you know, like just that kind of like it's the iPhone case mentality of like, oh, I want all this weird little stuff, and I think he's been really good at bringing that into.
Students can buy it then.
Exactly, it lets people buy into the brand.
Point,
yeah, exactly. Andrew, you're being very uncharacteristically quiet.
Sorry, I'm dying to see the show.
What's your take on the rebranding? Tell me.
I mean, he very early on with his own brand, he wasn't just a young designer and a label. For him, it was about being a brand, and he saw that bigger picture. And very early on, he developed an ad campaign that wasn't paid for in any way, but it was used in magazines and stuff. So when people are going around Europe shopping for designers at design houses, this guy's already tuned into the fact that he's got to work with a team of an art director, a photographer, a muse, a stylist, and I think that's the clever thing that he's done very quickly.
And do you like what he?
Yes, I mean, God, to work with Eminem must be like so great for him to do that. And then to work with Stephen Meisel, I think the opening line to him was the fact that his basis of the work was going to be on Stephen's archive, and what a flattering way to kind of reel somebody in to work with them.
You kind of mentioned the archive imagery that they've used, and let's go on to our kind of the second point, which I want to talk about, which is the imagery. And we've kind of touched on it, that it's been really important to the rebranding, but you know, some of those collaborators we've mentioned, you know, who did redesign the logo and do all of the kind of amazing lip books that Loewe come out with, and then obviously Stephen Meisel, but also Jamie Hawksworth, who does the JW campaign but then does the lip books.
And he did the John Allen.
Yeah, and did the John Allen thing. Is imagery and design, are they completely kind of, they can't work without each other? Is imagery, does it have more currency than ever?
I think the thing about the Meisel campaigns is that there's no product in there. So actually you're not selling a handbag, you're selling a mood, which is so much more valuable and such a stronger brand building exercise than actually saying this is the bag that you should be buying this season, and then
especially now with that instantaneous, you know, with people Instagramming it, things, it's really effective. And historically, maybe it wouldn't have been as good because you actually need to see the product when it's just in a magazine.
But it's breaking with the codes and conventions of fashion photography. So by using an archive, you don't really say anything about what the image represents, and I think that's really clever and sort of modern. He stresses this thing that he wants to be modern, but it deals with the social meaning of an image. So it's already self-consciously dealing with what do images mean to us, and these are images, you know, we don't know, but they're also, you know, they're very personal, and they're about narrative, and they're about, you know, somebody's history. And I think that opens up all different subjects and ideas that go beyond just the simple Tumblr mentality or something that we see on Instagram. I think it's something that we probably see in a fine art context much more than we see in fashion.
No,
but it breaks with codes, and that's good. That's different.
The Stephen Meisel images make you feel very old though, because it feels like yesterday that all of them came out. When you look at the years, like the reference points we have, we started in the industry.
That is funny.
Well, one of the likenesses between Loewe and Saint Laurent is that they're both deliberately driving at a younger customer now, and they're saying that that's a, you know, sort of strategic move, and I think it means that they can sort of start bringing in their devotees, their disciples earlier on, and they'll stay with them for the brand for a longer time.
Did anyone see the Business of Fashion Yves Saint Laurent article this morning?
I did,
which was saying that about what percentage what you were saying.
Yeah,
it was about 45% of it was all the casual wear, which is exactly in line.
And yet those pieces are sort of so ageless as well, and so you see older women buying the tailored jackets, the sort of smart trousers.
I just think there's such a mood of kind of nostalgia at the moment. I think that's what's most interesting about these campaigns, is it just does tap into that idea that like old feels much newer than new stuff. I know it sounds very strange, but I think that's what I find really interesting. It feels like so contemporary, even though it's relying on this really, it's really, really strange, that, isn't it? I can't work out if that is just online culture and things like Instagram with people regurgitating old imagery, or if there's something more to it.
Well, it's strange, when you did that rebrand, there was, you know, you're sort of talking about past, present and future, and that kind of trinity of phrases is used so often, but it's actually far more challenging to actually bring to life. And with this campaign, he's actually managed to, I think, do that. You know, with the archive, but with the, you know, with a lot of the sort of almost like forward-looking kind of imagery, as well as the handbag.
I mean, it's an image of an image, isn't it? So it's about the photograph as an object, not as a flat screen.
Yeah.
And that's good.
It's interesting as well, I think, how he's used the imagery, because I think he has always, as you say, it's a photograph, but I think he's also positioned his imagery in a way where it's quite old school. You know, the fact that they always put it on the billboards around Paris, and even those lookbooks, he's encouraging people to take pictures of pictures. You know, if you look at the way it's kind of regrammed or posted on Tumblr, it is often pictures like this, not just the image itself, and I think that's quite interesting. Because it kind of plays with digital culture but removes itself from it as well.
It's also the documentary thing that he's trying to feed through with everything.
The sense of Loewe being everywhere.
The Hawksworth thing and the John Allen thing, and he makes them into books, the Larry Clark thing. He's continuing that whole kind of documentary journey. I feel a little bit like you're kind of looking at his mood board, but then the product is so far beyond when you see the finished product, like the last season Loewe or his own, which is kind of interesting. You're getting that kind of Pinterest peep in.
I also think he's trying to kind of, I think he's noticed how much people like to collect objects, like even just like things like, there's that huge market for old-fashioned books, things like idea books, and I think he's trying to put himself in that already by making those books, and you know how people kind of try and buy the old, like, I don't know, like the comic books and or the old Yoji catalogues that Nick did, and I think he's kind of almost trying to involve himself with that, even though it's new. It's quite
I would have loved to have been in that meeting where he pitched the idea that he was buying the old Mizell images with LVMH.
Yeah.
See how he pulled that one off.
Well, when I kind of interviewed him about it, he kind of said that they hadn't definitely decided that they were going to use an old image. It was more like he's always loves that image, and he said it's always been floating around his studio, the beach scene, I mean. And then it kind of, there didn't seem much point getting to do a new image or recreate it, so they were like, oh, we'll just use it. And it kind of, he made it sound much more casual than I'm sure it was. But I thought that was quite interesting, that notion of like, you know, why not?
But then he got away with it. I mean, it's...
Exactly, it worked really well. How are they going to keep the imagery fresh though? That's one thing I think about, because it is so, it's becoming quite ubiquitous, and I mean that it's everywhere. And the Jamie imagery, like, you know, Jamie Hawksworth has a very particular style. How are they going to stop that from getting tired, where people are like, oh, it's the same old Loewe lookbook, kind of moody, yellowish, sun-kissed? How are they going to keep it?
Well, I think the collection is going to be important to that, because obviously not all of the imagery is going to be the archive images. You're doing things like the Jamie imagery, you know, and then the accessories things that you're bringing in other collaborators. And they probably won't do the Stephen Mizell thing forever.
And it's the same question that every brand faces, and you look at something like Jürgen shooting Vivienne Westwood, and that's been the same for years and years, and it still looks fun because the people that they feature are different, or the clothes change, you know, those small nuances, but actually what remains is that strength of message. So it's another question as to whether they want to move away from that.
Because I think there's something to be said for like a coherence and a consistency in messaging, actually. You know, it's interesting to see whether he does eventually move away from Mizell, because in interviews he said, if I can, I'm going to work with, you know, for the rest of the career as long as I can.
We saw the picture this morning of the Mizell as a child.
It is very cute.
And so I think, you know, the context of that may change the collections, but having a kind of coherence of messaging is actually a very powerful thing, rather than having to...
I just think he's the designer that relies so much on press and on that kind of new, and I think his currency is new, and I just wonder how they will keep this feeling exciting and keep generating the amount of press that he feels he needs. Why are you smiling, AJ?
I mean, it's that thing where, you know what, the minute sales start to change or there's a fluctuation in things, the photographer will change. That's what happens. Right. That's what happened at Calvin, that's what happened with Dolce, it always happens, so let's see.
Do you think people will get tired of it though?
I don't think people will get tired of it, but it's a good excuse to change somebody or to get a different person in that costs a little bit less when you're looking at, you know, balancing your books and stuff.
And do you like the imagery?
Yeah, I think it's amazing.
Yeah. And why do you, because it's interesting with the titles that you work with, because I think they also kind of tap into that, like, that kind of, the way online things like Instagram, things like Tumblr have changed the way young people look at imagery. Do you think that that's part of why it's successful, that kind of, that nostalgia that we were talking about?
Maybe, but not always. I think that people are always going to need some inspiring kind of image to do anything. Do you know what I mean? As creatives, that's all we look for. There are lots of collections when we see them now that look like, oh God, it's a collection developed and looked at on Instagram, like the new Versace collection looks at. It's her take on people ripping her off and stuff. So I think that's important. That is an important part of imagery, but I don't think it's necessarily like a Tumblr thing.
Has this made us realise though how the kind of the Mizell campaign, has it made us realise how unadventurous most fashion advertising is now? do we think fashion advertising is good?
Yeah, because the majority of it's a bag and a pair of sunglasses and a shoe all in the same picture. That's not necessarily exciting for someone to look at.
Well, you look at the old Loewe campaigns. I mean, even though they're photographed by Matt and Marcus, it shows it's more than the photographer, because they could be. Sorry to say this, it could be an Oasis campaign, or the very Spanish ones with the Penelope Cruz, and it's not very.
It's not very, but so much fashion
doesn't make you
advertising
think.
like that.
It's
Yeah,
just you see the quality.
I think you see that cut through, right, with the differences between those campaigns which are image making as an art and versus like image making as just a look.
But who's doing the image making as an art? It's so hard. I think I just if you look through magazines at the moment, it's so hard to be like, oh wow, they're doing really amazing campaigns. I think.
I mean, Solon is another example of where it really works, and where, I mean, obviously with Eddie's own sort of background in photography, I think that plays into it as well.
Yeah.
But there is a signature, there's something that carries through, and there it's subculture, and here it's nostalgia.
And again, in Saint Laurent, they bring a documentary feel to the imagery as well.
It's similar with Celine. That it was interesting that
Joan Didion.
Yeah, it was kind of came along at the same time.
I think it's worth looking at the Louis Vuitton series 1, 2 and 3 with 3 photographers, because there's brilliant consistency in that. And the casting and the locations, and I think that's something that can roll out and you're looking forward to the next edition. So it's almost like the bones of the process are raised to the surface when you're calling it series 1, 2, 3, 4. And again, you kind of see JW working in a similar way. You know, there's a sort of very self-conscious curation of what's going on.
I think there's also the thing that, I mean, Tilly mentioned it on my other thing of having an image that doesn't feature product. And you know, some of my favourite campaigns have been like comm campaigns and comm shirt, that there isn't a shirt in there. You know, they're almost commissioned kind of art frames, and there's something, you know, when you're looking through or within whatever context, something that really cuts through. Or even how you use talent and celebrity. I mean, you mentioned that kind of Joan Didion one, but you know, the Annie Leibovitz, I always remember for Vuitton with Gorbachev and Keith Richards within the same campaign. It's like, okay.
It's interesting you talk about the clothes thing, because I was talking to Nick Knight recently, because we were talking about, we've been doing a lot of work with his old McQueen archive, and he was kind of making a comparison between working with Yoji on those old catalogues with Marcus Scully and Peter Saville, and working with McQueen, and he was like, neither of them really cared about having clothes in it. And if you actually look at the Yoji stuff, it's like there's like no clothes in it whatsoever, and he didn't used to talk about the clothes, he used to say, show me my dreams, so that's why it's all kind of like.
But there's an interesting reference with that, and when we were talking about the rebrand, about that trinity with, you know, with Nick and Mark and Peter as a design kind of styling, image making sort of trinity around that designer, and with and with Mizell, what you've kind of got there's already, you know, Andrew's sort of mentioning, you know, sort of having a team early on that is building a brand and is building a world around that, rather than here's a collection that's.
Yeah, and it also never feels like people are working for him, and I think that's an interesting power balance that you see a lot with big design houses. Is like they select a photographer to shoot their campaign, whereas this feels much more like it does feel much more like an organic collaboration. Even just like the way that all of them were always at the shows, that they were at the JW show in London, and there's a real sense of pride. If you go on their own Instagrams, it's like constantly they're posting it as well, which is.
There's a fun thing I was just looking at, something you mentioned about, you know, campaigns where you've got so much in them, what cuts up, just using white space and actually not having to try and put so much in. Sometimes it's the simplest things which have.
But things are different now.
That's really true, actually.
You can click straight through to buy nowadays, so you can just have an image that is an image, because you'll look up JW Anderson and you can go straight through to buy, whereas historically you had to then see it, and maybe you'd see it 5 times, and then you might go to a shop. You know, you didn't have that option to just see the name, oh, what's that?
Yeah, and then click through.
But also I think that's where people are becoming more sophisticated in their learning. Like, you would see that and you would click through expecting to buy something, whereas there was a period of time when that had to be a handbag to understand that you could click through to buy that handbag, and people's perception of how to shop that way is changing as well.
Yeah, and I think people also, like, I think, you know, it's a common thing of like, it's never been more fashionable to like fashion, but I think the consumer now likes to feel intelligent. They like to almost feel like they've stumbled across something, or like they know about it because they've kind of found it themselves, rather than it's just something that everyone knows about. And I think he plays with that really well. He makes his shopper feel intelligent and feel cultured and feel like they're kind of aware of the world and what's going on.
And he specifically says, like with the last collection, he holds some things back. He won't show every piece. He'll show sort of half a look and a jacket, and then in the showroom you see something completely different, because he wants to protect that idea of the collection being fully exposed from day one. So you always have that element of surprise and discovery.
I think it's all wrapped up in the name of the handbag, isn't it? You know, he's putting forward a puzzle that he's inviting people to solve.
Very good. That was nice. That was well done. You can tell you're done. Before we actually talk about the puzzle bag, should we have a look at what he's done for this season, and then we'll talk about the bag at the end. So let's see what he's done for autumn.
There's a puzzle bag.
Yeah, there is a puzzle bag. Just as we go through it, did we all like the JW campaign, the JW collection?
Yes.
Yeah.
Adored it.
Yeah, it was good. I liked it a lot. Sorry, can we just stay on the first look? Sorry. So it's a bit different from last season, but you can see, I think he's so smart with what he does with blocking, you know, like putting lots of different looks together. And one of the things that I found the most interesting about the JW show was that he didn't do that. It was all about kind of individual looks. So it's interesting that he's still doing it here. What's your first impression, Andrew? Because I know you were waiting for the collection, so now it's here.
I mean, it's very clever. It's very much aligned with what he did in London, isn't it? It's got that little kind of 80s feel to it, which was what his own collection was like. I always like that thing that he does in men's, where it's literally the same trouser with every look. I think that's a very smart thing. It saves a lot of time as well.
But it also caters to how men are more, whereas we wouldn't have the same trouser with every look. Men might do.
But I like the fact that it went to 4 looks with the same trouser, and then you're probably going to see 4 of the next silhouette and stuff. I really like the idea of that.
I think
these tunics these ones in lambskin.
Yeah, I think so. From what we can
adore them like you did last season.
Yeah, they're beautiful. I think it's interesting actually, just looking at the show notes that they've provided as well. It very much focuses on fabric and colour and fabrication and fit and form. It doesn't focus on like big conceptual ideas, which I think he plays with quite well, because it means you're kind of always left a bit guessing what the theme is, and I think that's quite smart. And it also makes it seem quite luxurious.
I'm so happy that a designer like J.W. Anderson got the opportunity to work with that level of fabrics and production and team, because he can do it.
Yeah, it was interesting actually. That was another thing he said when I spoke to him recently, is he kind of talked about I think he was having a bit of a dig actually. He was like, that level of craftsmanship that's available to you there, like, you know, you use it, it's amazing. And he was like, it was quite lazy what was happening before, which I thought was quite punchy, but I think it really shows. I think he is thriving with having all these kind of master craftsmen around him.
But there's something of the cartographer around him, and the way that he sort of uses aesthetics but design and a science to kind of...
No, I think that's a good point. It's quite cluttered compared to the last collection. I thought the last collection was very clean and very there was like a real purity to it, whereas this is much more, it's braver, it's fussier, it's kind of, there's not all of it works, and that feels quite deliberate, you know, it feels like deliberately a bit wayward, which I guess ties into what he was doing at...
There's still quite straightforward pieces though, if you look at them as individual things, like there's no sort of awkward corduroy, like nun's dress or like that you're used to seeing in London.
No, it seems very functional, doesn't it?
That's a nun's metallic tunic.
But I think you're right, it is very pull apart the pieces, which I think is clever.
Yeah, so if you've got an older customer, she can go in and buy that soft trench, and she can still feel like she's cool.
Yeah, definitely. I think that I just think Benjamin Bruno is so talented. I think he's amazing, and I do think the way it's all put together is incredibly intelligent. Because it looks so fashion, but then as you say, you can pull that apart, and actually there's a lot of stuff there that's like we're looking at a lilac polo neck, you know, it's like that's gonna...
And Jonathan was a stylist himself for a brief period.
He worked in window dressing.
He worked for Rufus Wainwright as well, apparently. I saw in my research. He was a stylist.
He's a style Rufus.
Yeah.
I also love the sets. They're so simple, but they really give that sort of mood of something a little bit uncomfortable.
Yeah.
It's also from the last collection, that sort of soft Balearic quality. There's a sharpness with these metallics. That feel more kind of almost more nightlife.
Yeah, it is more nightlife.
That kind of outdoors.
And those colours, that's the light that you see in the Mediterranean.
But I do think that's a really smart point. I do think last season was very rural. It felt very soft, whereas this is much more urban. It's much more like city life, going out, you know, which is what he was looking at with his own collection. I do think, I think it was Tilly that said at the start, he plays very well between his two collections and kind of bounces them off each other.
But in a way, the sort of consistencies with these materials, that their relationship with like skin, they sort of really cling. In that last collection, there were a lot of slashes, but you know, these kind of tunics and...
Well, his consistency with material has always been his thing, like sharing materials between the men's and women's, and
obviously a huge push on sunglasses.
And
the new belt.
The belt.
Yeah, the belt. It's accessory heavy, isn't it? Oh, we've lost number 26, Britt. We can see it.
Ready to carry on.
Oh, we'll just carry on. We'll see it later. Thank you.
And the colours are surprising. I mean, looking at the colour combinations, yeah, they're you know, they're different. They're new. Some of them, yes, as you say, the purple jumper, or here that the red with the beige and the blue.
And that skirt he's bringing in his younger customer.
I do think it's I do find its diversity interesting. I think I think there's so many different looks from this that you could pull apart, and if you put them down on the floor, you'd say that they were from very different collections.
Yeah.
And I can't work out whether that's a sensible thing to have done this early on, because I think the real strength of last season was just how it all almost looked the same. It was beautiful, but it was so every look was very, very, very similar. Whereas this is really, really not like that. But maybe that's
But it still feels very cohesive.
Yeah,
the styling
it does,
of
yeah.
it
And the trousers.
Yeah.
Through.
But I wonder if what's making it feel cohesive is things like the trousers and the styling, like the sunglasses and the bag, and
yeah, maybe on the right.
I think he's thinking that he's got a lot of windows to dress. So you can't just put a plain tunic in a window.
Yeah.
You need to put something jazzy in a window
And
to
there's
get
some really
someone's
strong
attention.
graphics, right?
So even if nobody buys that, he's got to put it in 160 stores in every window. So at least that justifies them doing it. And then you put karma pieces within the store and stuff.
Yeah, that's smart. I also think it's just thinking about I know he's so cute. Just thinking about like the trickle down as well. You think some of those amazing patterns, you can imagine he is looking for things that he's going to put on the next pouches and the key rings and kind of and that really graphic square. And you know, these amazing patterns that we're seeing here, you can imagine that filtering down and becoming something that you get on a little like leather good.
And they're going to be using the logo quite a lot on the leather goods as well.
Yeah,
so
much.
About him wanting to get rid of the logo altogether, and then they realised that actually that probably wasn't the cleverest thing to do.
I do think the logo redesign is I think it's such a beautiful logo now,
really
and it was
lovely.
so clever. I think Emma really like genius with that. It's really, really beautiful. I think it is quite funny that everyone's been doing quite kind of sensual 70s stuff, and then this is really kind of like...
It's quite abrasive.
Yeah, it is. It's not... Yeah.
Some strong colours and graphics.
It's not seductive, really, at all, is it? But do we like it? Do you like it, Andrew? You look really
It's going to look great on a page for me. That's all I care about. I don't care how much he sells.
When you pull it apart, there are pieces you definitely want to buy. I mean, I don't think it's, you know, the same with J.W. Anderson's London show.
Yeah.
You know, if you looked at it as a whole, okay, 80s, well, did we like the 80s?
Yeah.
You know? But yet, the pieces were amazing.
Yeah, no, very true. I do also think the bags are incredible when you look at them.
Sorry.
What were you going to say?
I was going to say, they were amazing, but they're much harder than this. Like a kind of skin-tight jumbo cord trouser with a kick-out flare. Like, it's tricky, whereas this is
But then I think that the sales pressure on his own label is very different.
Completely.
Yeah, I think...
Completely.
Well, there's not sales to lose in the same way there is on Loewe.
Yeah, exactly. And I also think, you know, it's like you know, it's like when high street stores do big designer collaborations, they don't really make any money on them, but the press that they get is huge. I always think with his shows it's kind of a bit like that, like the amount of coverage it gets and the amount that people talk about him, like kind of doesn't matter if he doesn't sell anything because the marketing value of that is so huge.
And it's the foreplay for the Loewe show.
Exactly, yeah, exactly. And I think it's very interesting how he does. You know, it was really interesting when you had Marc Jacobs when he used to show, and then you have him at Vuitton, and that kind of thing of bookending the season. I think obviously it's not quite the same because it's not in New York, but I think to have those kind of two conversations, I think is quite interesting. It seemed interesting in the details as well, just looking at those trousers. I think there's a lot probably that you see close up that you
don't see when
that you don't see.
And the shoes as well. They're interesting on the right.
Yeah, they have talked about scientific inspiration in it, which does feel quite sci-fi.
The sunglasses.
Yeah.
Sci-fi.
Yeah. I can't work out what I think about it. It's so, but maybe that's what makes it good. It's kind of
that always makes it good, doesn't it? That it takes you a little bit of time to just take it in and get used to it. I think that's a really good sign.
I think it's very. I think what I think was interesting is I looked at the show notes obviously before I looked at the collection. I tried not to peek at it, and it talks about revisiting the woman introduced last season, and I see this as a very different woman.
Yeah, she's a very different woman.
Yeah. Which is interesting because the men's I thought was very, very similar. You know, the two collections that he did, he talks about building on it obviously sensibly because it was very beautiful, but there was a real synergy, whereas this is, I think, quite opposite.
Yeah, the other woman was like quiet, essential. This woman's been out all night partying. Two very different women. Maybe she's grown up a little bit. Or this is her rebel sister or something.
It's also that difference in geography as well.
Yeah.
You know, that kind of idea of where it's set. This feels far more metropolitan and city-based rather than, I mean, you touched upon it, that kind of rural feel for the last collection.
Yeah.
I mean, the arts and crafts element also that I associate with the previous collection, that's not here. And I like that this is, it's urban, as you say, it's working. It's, you know, this is busy, this is not thinking about fabrics and texture. This is just, it's about effect, isn't it?
I'd love to see the collection in the showroom.
Yeah.
To see how it is with the individual.
Yeah, because when you get close to this, it is very arts and crafts, and that's what's so nice about it. You just want to touch
and
it.
that leather, so beautiful.
But I think this does have that tactile quality still.
Yeah.
Yes.
And it doesn't feel crafty, but it still has that. It's so product heavy, like it's like bag, shoe, sunglasses, belt.
Didn't they say in the notes that they're introducing a new
they've done
Barcelona kind of shoulder bag?
I wonder if it's that.
Can we talk about the puzzle bag?
Yeah, let's talk about it. I find it an interesting bag because they're trying to make it like a real it bag, and I do think it's a beautiful bag, and I think as a design, the way it kind of folds down flat is really, really amazing, but I have not seen anyone carrying it.
No, I mean, the it bag thing is, we don't know yet. That's LVMH telling us it's an it bag.
Well, it's that thing of like, Marion Hume was on one of the panels and said it's that thing, you know, trying to make an it bag. It's like saying, we want this video to go viral. It's exactly the same notion, which is really smart, but like, I can't work out if it's just going to take a while. Or
I don't think he's in a rush to make it an it bag, because if you've noticed, none of us have one. It's not been seeded to press, really. It's been the odd celebrity and stuff, but I think it's a slow burner.
Yeah.
I think he's trying to make it untouchable, and then you want it even more.
Yeah, I think that you're right. I think they're being very clever at not just giving it out to everyone, having everyone carrying it.
I've seen Julianne Moore with one. That's all I really see.
Yeah.
Well, she's a good one to start.
Yeah,
good timing.
I think you're right. He always wants to feel like it's. I think he's very good at giving a lot, but then also keeping certain things very, very exclusive. I think he's very good at doing that, and maybe that is part of the thing with that bag.
I mean, this idea of luxury that you talked about in Bon magazine, I think is really, I mean, it's an interesting point, isn't it? He associates it with an old-fashioned idea of airport customer. And I thought, wow, you know, that's quite an alienating thing to say, but it's also really brave, and I think that sort of is reflected in how he markets the bag, and I think how it's perceived.
I love the way he talks about the bag in that interview. So this is the interview I did for it. It was in Bon magazine, and he kind of talked about them, and he was like, you just need, he was like 100 like people who have influence to kind of have it, and then he was like, and then they have it, and then the next one picks it up, and then the next one picks it up, and then the next one, and he really does think of it like a conveyor belt, like it's so sales focused. And you kind of recoil a bit when he kind of starts with that, because I don't think we're used to hearing designers talk about that in a very kind of like, not a dismissive way of their shopper, but almost, you know, like get one and then off they go, get the next one. But then it's there is something that's quite refreshing about it. It's like the honesty, I did find it quite, it's interesting.
But there was a big pull back on the whole it bag thing when the recession came.
And
all the big brands suddenly cut, because everyone was having a new bag every 6 months, and it became ridiculous, so they had to tone it down. Yves Saint Laurent just had the downtown then, and that was so this is kind of a new, I mean, obviously we had the Celine in between, but there's not been many it bags. Kind of people are still carrying the same bag from 6 years ago, and that's still really cool and it baggy.
And that's kind of why I wanted to talk about it, because I think it is interesting just as a design exercise as well, because it the way it looks, it's not that. I mean, there's an element where it looks a little bit childish. You know, it's a little bit. It's not kind of that adult. It's not very. You know, I think a lot of the bags that we've seen have kind of become quite popular, like the Givenchy ones and the Celine ones. They're very focused on very clean leather, very structured, quite stiff. Whereas this is very supple.
They've done the stiff one next to it. That's
that is new, which is interesting.
Yeah, the bag looks dysfunctional.
Yeah,
you know, it looks like it could be a prototype. You kind of see that sort of JW asymmetry coming through, which does make it look different. But it's what you're saying. It's like, is that bag going to be the lure for Mrs. Wong when she goes through Hong Kong duty free?
Yeah.
Is it going to grab her? Because it is unconventional.
Yeah, it is unconventional. I think that you're right, and I don't think it doesn't feel that luxurious. I think that notion, I wonder if anyone buys a bag because they find it kind of a beautiful piece of design. And I think this is what this is branding itself as, something that kind of folds down flat and is incredibly skillfully made, but then do people buy bags as pieces of design? I don't know.
Is that its
Maybe
USP that it folds down flat?
I think it's part of the kind
you're
of
not going to carry anything in it.
Yeah, it's useful.
I know, but that's what I mean. It's like a really kind of bizarre.
If you travel a lot, you have them in 5 colours, and you can put them in your suitcase.
Right.
That's the idea.
It's very characteristically JW in that it feels a bit off. It makes you feel a bit uncomfortable, and we've seen that before. Like when Phoebe Philo put Birkenstocks on the catwalk, or when Christopher Kane did like those scuba flip flops, and they look fugly to start with, like they look so odd, and then you totally come around to the idea, and it's such a subtle thing, and actually it's so well pitched that it's not ostentatious, there's no sort of bells and whistles hanging off it. The mood of it feels really right for now, but there's something different about it that the Fashion Insider will recognise that, like they will start to build a cult around them. He's done them in a million different colourways, like you can get,
so many.
you know, the Celine trapeze and all of those. So I think it's one of those things with longevity as well. Or I'm sure that's probably why he's pitching.
Why are you smiling, Andrew? You're looking so naughty.
No, I was about to agree with the fact that it looks ugly. I was thinking about it's that thing that makes you jump. Like when I saw that Gucci women's show, the shoes looked like someone was kicking a wig down the catwalk. But actually they're these beautiful like hair.
But I think there's a fashion for that. You're right, Tilly. Like I think people like stuff that looks a little bit kind of clunky and unconventional, and I think it taps into that. But at the same time, I don't know. I just find it interesting. I think the way they've pushed that bag, whereas I think it would have been safer in a way to because I
flamenco.
I think it's really smart what he's done with the flamenco. Like he's cleaned up the tassels that were on it and turned them into these really beautiful knots, and I think that's a really beautiful piece of design. I'm surprised they've pushed the puzzle rather than the flamenco.
The whole talk when he was going to Loewe, then the kind of whisper in the industry was that he was taking all the hardware off, or practically all the hardware except the inside zips. Whereas this has got hardware. So it is a kind of very structured product, and so that's what's quite interesting as it goes away from what we thought was going to happen.
The
one they're really pushing is not the flamenco.
It is interesting that. I just wonder how long it's gonna. I wonder if I would love to see like sales figures on it. I just want to know the game plan for it. I think that's what I can't work out because it seems on some hand they do want it to be everywhere, but they don't as well. It's a strange one.
But I think I really like what you said to me about this idea of not being ostentatious, and that fits in with this new idea around luxury as well.
But that's his whole idea, I think, isn't it? He wants people. I think he sees luxury as people wanting to feel intelligent and cultured and part of a curated world.
Cultural capital.
Yeah, exactly. Yes. I think it's like that thing of like, oh, I know this, I'm aware of that, I'm versed in this, I've read about that, rather than like, oh, I have a lot of money and I've bought this.
Yeah.
I think there's an element to this though as well that is, it's unconventional, but there's a sense of novelty as well, and whether that's as relevant anymore, but within kind of the history of sort of bags, some of the most successful have had a sense of novelty too.
Yeah, like the giant clothes.
The Fendi, you could put anything in a baguette, and there's still waiting lists for it.
They're bonkers. What have been the greatest it bags? I was trying to think about this the other day.
The Balenciaga one, I think. No?
Yeah, the Lariat,
the baguette.
The baguette.
Yeah.
The Prada rucksack.
Yeah, Prada rucksack.
Birkin.
But you can never work out why they took off. Like we were talking about with the PS1, the Parenzo bag, why that suddenly was everywhere. And
I think there were less of them as well. So if you had a bag that was chicer and seemed more stylish or different, the market was less crowded, So you could stand out and be different.
Which I wonder is kind of what they're going for this. That people were like, oh, you have the puzzle bag. Like it's a bit of a kind of a novelty one rather than kind of like.
You know what it reminds me actually of Isimiaki Baobab,
which
is a huge seller in Asia.
Yeah.
I think there is quite an Asian appeal to this as well.
But I think he's always drawn very much on kind of that aesthetic. The Yoji references are kind of very visible in his work. There is an international thing to his collections as well. I do think that's, we talked about the diversity of this show, but I think that's another smart thing to it. You can imagine there's aspects of it that will work very well in Europe and aspects that will work very well in Asia.
Japan's been one of their biggest markets forever, because I was reading something from a while ago saying that when the recession came in Japan and Spain, there was 2/3 of their market gone. I mean, that was a huge issue for this business.
So are we impressed with what he's done? What do we want to see next from him? What path do we think he's following? Do we have any pointers for him? What's our takeaway?
I think it's good because he's made it a discussion point. Because you'd be thinking, is this ugly? Is this attractive? Do I wear that chevron leather sweatshirt?
Yeah.
I want to see it in the store.
But that's kind of always been his whole thing, isn't it? It's like, would I wear that frilly bandeau top as a man?
Well,
like,
he started at Prada, didn't he? And that's exactly their remit. So
I also feel there's something very interesting in the way that he works in terms of building a character. And the last collection, there was a very clear character, and with this, there's a very clear character. And you're sort of wondering, well, next season, who's that character going to be? And I think that sort of coherence is going to, it's going to suit him very well.
Yeah, and it's missing from a lot of runways as well. You don't get a sense of a woman or a person or a character or a narrative at all, do you?
And that kind of relates back to a lot of the kind of things we were talking about from a brand building exercise too.
Yeah. So we're impressed both with the branding and with the design then.
Also, you don't see who the models are, which is interesting, and that's not crucial to what he's doing.
Yeah, but that goes back to the campaign exactly, doesn't it? That it's,
again, he's wiping that out.
Yeah, I don't think you associate a girl with Loewe really. You know, like.
Do we know what the location for it? What's the location for it?
It's at the UNESCO place again, isn't it? I believe. I might have just got that completely wrong.
Can you
check? Yeah. And do you like it then?
Yeah, it's great. But I think the first women's one was very calm, and then I think he looked at what's going on with new brands. Like, he could see what was going to happen with Gucci, I think, with after seeing the men's show. Preempting the women's was going to be, artisan and kind of jazzy, so he's kind of upped his game a bit and just kind of keeping up with what's going on. I think that's his skill.
Yeah, definitely his skill, I think, is looking around what people are doing and
often going in another direction when everyone was sort of going kind of 70s and just going in a kind of new wave 80s.
Yeah, I think you're so right, the JW
That's a brave,
It's brave, but it's also, in a way, it's safe because you'll get. I think that's what he's clever with, being kind of it is the UNESCO thing, responding, but also offer something new. Well, shall we give him a clap to round things up?